I was trying to get my PowerPoint presentation. I actually had a PowerPoint presentation for this today, but of course, Microsoft ate it. It's like my dog. It's like a bad version of my dog ate my homework. I actually was planning on doing that, having proper a proper presentation to show everyone, but I guess we'll have to go without. I'm trying to now I'm gonna have to do most of what I remember from scratch. That's why I wrote it down in the PowerPoint, so I don't have to remember it. Today's discussion, though, is going to be about progressive web apps, PWAs. So, like I said, have to do it from memory, but well, that was Sunday when I wrote that thing. So hopefully I get it all down. Basically, what are progressive web apps? So, progressive web app is an application that's designed and built in using web technologies, but it's not necessarily meant entirely for mobile. But yeah, it works. It works on mobile devices, and even is written in such a way to act like a mobile application. That's the whole goal. That's the whole goal, at least. Um, so basically, that's where this all comes from. That's what we're talking about. There's a number of different things that come into play with a PWA. Those are just joining. I'm going to say it again. I did have an actual presentation. I had an actual PowerPoint presentation. I suppose I could show me trying to open it and show my screen, and it just said grant access, and I said okay, grant access, and it said can't open file. So, like I said, Microsoft ate my homework. So onward. Basically, progressive web apps, what they need is there's a couple things they need to actually be that. Now, part of a progressive web app for me is also what's called responsive design, and responsive design is something that looks different in different views. So if you have a normal desktop application that fits the whole screen, here I'm going to try to get my hands about right here, then basically what you have is it looks like a desktop. It's laid out differently. Many times it's laid out more horizontally, cross, and kind of in rows and that kind of stuff. Maybe some left navs, maybe some top navs, whatever they might be. But that's basically the idea behind a desktop app. And then as it shrinks down, as it gets seen inside of a phone, or maybe even a tablet, depending on the size of the tablet and the orientation. Then it looks different. Usually it's more laid out, especially on a phone, it's laid out more vertical. So, the items that were horizontal now stack vertically like this, and they then display like that. And so basically the site looks different based upon what you're doing. Now that's responsive design, but that does come into play, I believe, as part of progressive web apps, because it's still all written in one code base, but it acts differently and it responds differently based upon the medium that it's viewed on, based upon the device that it's viewed on in this case. And so that's part of that. Another part of progressive web apps that I actually had to build one. Actually, the previous job I was at, I had to build a progressive web app. It was designed as a desktop app. Now you got to remember, back in the day, back when that application was first designed, that was before mobile first development was a thing. And so, designing a desktop app was kind of what most people did at the time. So we had an application that was designed as a desktop app. And then suddenly we started getting a lot of users saying, hey, why can't we use this site on our actual mobile phones? Distract us with the dog. The power for the PowerPoint homework. That's a good one, Bob. Yeah, it should be the dog ate my homework, but it's a computer, so Microsoft ate my homework. Anyways, yeah. So basically, what happened there is we had to make this something that the users could still use, but this is how I feel, at least. A lot of times, when you start in that way, an app that was originally designed as a desktop app, and you got to realize that application had a number of places that were specific to administration and those kinds of things, and so those really didn't play well into the mobile side of things. So what we had, what we did, okay, what I did, because I was the one that tasked to do this, well, what I did is I basically said, okay, well, those items don't need to be here. You had to start making decisions. And luckily, we were using Angular as a framework at the time, and that allowed us to. Angular has a concept of modules to where if you go down certain paths and things like that, you can have your applications only load certain pieces. So it worked out really well because that application was pretty heavy when it came to like the desktop app. The full loaded desktop app was somewhere in the range of like 50 or 60 megs download, a huge, huge download for the desktop. And we realized, obviously, and I realized that that was not going to work on a mobile. I mean, imagine trying to download 60 megs of JavaScript and content and all of this other stuff. And a lot of those things were really big, honking components there too. So we ended up writing our own components. I ended up writing um, a number of mobile components and things like that. And what we did is then when they came in on a mobile device, it detected they were on a mobile device very early on in the loading process and sent them down a path that was a mobile path that loaded only a very small portion of the site, which is really great if you're starting with a desktop site. It's this huge, massive site, but you're out on a mobile and you don't want to have these massive 50 megs downloads on mobile. So no, I think I cut it down to about 5 or less megs because I took out this major grid that we had in there that was a very specific grid that would only work in on the desktop anyways. AG Grid, in case anyone's wondering. I think AG Grid since then has made it to where it can work on mobile, but still it's really much better as like a big grid for an application that's meant to be worked around a grid. And so, I developed my own mobile grid, my own this, my own that, and we sent them down this path. And yet, it was still in the same application, but it ran very well on a mobile device. Where I think the popularities of PWAs have come up recently is because of app stores. The Google Play Store I haven't heard so many things about, but the Apple App Store I have. That one has personally has caused me issues before. I worked for Charles Schwab. That was one job before I left. I had one more job before that before I left for Australia. So I worked for Charles Schwab, and anyone that lives in the States knows how big Charles Schwab is. They're a massive financial firm, huge multi-billion-dollar firm, and they had issues getting their app onto the Apple App Store. So you can see the point. You can see the problem that this faces, especially for smaller companies. Charles Schwab was able to pay for an application that went through and took their code and ran it through all the checks that the Apple people would run it through in trying to catch a lot of the problems that would happen up front. And still, even then, I know there was one time while I was on the team that it got denied and they had to push back the release of their app, at least for the Apple App Store, by X number of days while they fixed some of the issues that came back. So that's where PWA I think really comes in handy because it's deployed on a single location. It's deployed as a web application. You point to your browser there. There's even things I was going to bring up some of these things on here. There's even things with progressive web apps called a manifest file. The manifest files, a lot of the mobile apps have these as well. It's definitions of things and stuff like that. Once again, it's not going to be here because unfortunately it wouldn't load. But yeah, the manifest file actually tells the device where certain things are, what certain things are, stuff like that, and you can do that with a progressive web app as well. Now, the Apple App Store does not do progressive web apps. You can't install it, but I did read that the Google Play Store does support progressive web apps. So if you set up things like your manifest file and things like that, technically you could have your mobile PWA, your progressive web app, installed as an app on a user's device, which is really, really interesting if you think about it. That's a really cool idea. um basically, yeah. Oh, all right. Someone else. Hey, sorry, I was redoing the whole page. Um, so basically, what you can do then is this now becomes almost like a viable solution to creating an app without having to worry about all of the problems of going through the app store. Now there's one more thing that makes it a progressive web app besides it just being, obviously created with web technologies, created with, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. But one more very important thing is it needs to be able to work offline. That is the next thing that makes it a progressive web app. And so the way that's done is the way. Let's see here. A job before. Let's see. No, that last job I was telling you about. The last job I was mentioning that I had before I moved over here. We actually did our app, even though that wasn't technically a progressive web app. That application also had to be able to work offline. And so the way that's usually done is through the usage of local storage and session storage. I think combined is like 20 megs of space there. There are libraries out there now. I didn't do this part of this application, but I did know enough about what was being done to be able to talk about it. Basically, there are libraries out there that will act as if it's a database of sorts, but it's basically just using JSON, and it's being stored inside of the local or session storage. And so what happens is, as the user, also then you need. This is why I needed my presentation. Dang it, this is why I need my presentation, because this is the one part. It's a web. Hang on, our current application. I didn't write this, but our current application does this as well. Um, Basically, there is a web. Hang on, if I can bring it up, I can actually find it. I've got, like I said, I've got it. The application I'm working on right now. We use one as well for ours, even though our application isn't directly considered a progressive web app. Let me see as it's loading here. Hopefully, service worker. That's the word I was looking for. It needs a service worker, and so. Sorry, I'm reading comments here. It's kind of funny. And so it needs a service worker. And the idea behind a service worker is this. So as your application is about ready to make a request, it goes to the service worker first. The service worker then knows whether or not the application is on or offline. If the application is online, obviously it lets it go right through and lets it go to the actual API and do the work that it's supposed to do. Get the data, transact back and forth. Do whatever kind of stuff that it does. Like this. And so basically that's kind of the idea of that, and that's how that works. So the service worker then, when it finds out that it's offline, says, well, instead of going out to the API, since it's not available right now, what we're going to do is we're going to switch and we're going to go over to the secondary storage. We're going to go over to the local storage and the session storage, and you can write it to interact with that type of stuff and save that type of data that's being saved offline. To the user, it looks like it's working as normal. It looks like it's still doing what it's supposed to do. If you and on, I know on the application we would even do some saving to the session state and sort of pre-save data. So as form, because we had forms, what would happen is we had forms that the user would do, and then as they were trying to fill out these forms, they had to pull down the form. It was settings. It was a JSON file with all the different settings, with all the different fields in it, and all that, so that it knew how to order itself and how to look. So to the user, and since we had 20 megs, that's a pretty decent amount of JSON. JSON's, it's not huge. It's not huge. Yes, it can be. You can definitely store a lot of data in JSON, but for what we were doing, um, it wasn't that big of a deal. So we could download the user's normal forms that they had, and make the application, even when it was offline, still look like it was online. The user had no idea whatsoever. So what they would do is they would interact with it, and it would end up saving. So when it was offline, it would end up saving to the storage, and then when the application came back online, a process will pick up and say, okay, well, let's find out what records have been saved over here, and go through and just take these offline items and actually then sit there and submit them one at a time making sure that all of them actually made it into the API in the end. But to the user, to the end user, it looked like everything was just the same. So that's kind of the way that that applications currently used to work, or that used to only be something that you could do with an actual installed app, an actual phone app, like one written in Swift or written in Kotlin or something like that, or back in earlier days, back in Java with the Android SDK. So those were the kind of things that you had to do. You had, if you wanted those features, you could only have those features on an installed app. Now with progressive web apps, you can pretty much do the same thing as the actual phone apps can do. The only difference, the only reason you would need a phone app is if you need something specifically that accesses phone hardware, and that's exactly why you would need to go with with an actual phone app. So if you need something, for example, that accesses the camera, I'm pretty sure that a PWA can't access a camera. I'm almost positive. I could be wrong. Someone may pop up and say, Brandon, you're out of date here. You're wrong. It can happen, but things like that are what I'm talking about. Things that are specific to that device, that only an application written for that device can access. That's the only time you really need, in my opinion, to have an app that actually is written for that phone. In the case of Charles Schwab, they were going to go down the progressive web app way, but they stayed with doing the native apps. And that's because they'd already spent so much time. And at the time, I don't think progressive web apps were really as far along as they are now, because their thing had absolutely nothing to do with the individual phones. Their thing was basically just accessing data about a user's account, their how their stocks are doing, how their different accounts, their different financial accounts with them are doing, and at the time they were doing they were trying to implement push notifications from the server. So it's trying to implement those type of things, but it literally, the application sat there and it polled. It would sit there every minute and it would poll. And actually they were I remember a discussion being made where they were wondering, how often should we do it, because some of the users' batteries were getting eaten up because the thing was just sitting there every minute. And so the question was, how often do we do that to make it work? And of course, they wanted to do push notifications. Now, that was probably close to 10 years ago. And like I said, before the last job, that job was in 2015. And of course, my dogs are going to start barking now. Hang on a second. I don't know how many times in the live stream that's happened. And of course, there he goes. He's already tracking again, about to go back out and bark at that dog again. This dog needs a lot of work. If he's quiet, I'll let him sit there and stand at the fence. Anyways, yes. So nowadays, though, we have, I do remember where I was. Look at that. Nowadays we have hang on, WebSockets. That's it. Nowadays we have WebSockets, and so the ability to actually have the, I don't know if anyone can hear that, but they're going at it again. There, he's on a leash. He won't be going back out anytime. Well, at least not till this is over. And so, yeah. So now we have WebSockets and those kinds of things. So I think if they had it to, if they would have wanted to do that nowadays, they probably would have gone with a PWA, because it would be a lot more advantageous. There's a lot more features available on the web and those kinds of things. I mean, I've got someone who's been asking me to do a web app for him, and what he wants is pretty interesting. I mean, it's really pushing the limits out there, but he basically wants some 3D stuff and things like that. So I'm digging into HTML canvas and all that kind of stuff. And some of the things that you can do on the web with just a website nowadays is really, really interesting. One of his examples he sent me was for one of the Marvel movies. Now I told him there's no way. I mean, what they created was probably 10 or 15 people working on this site. But it's a big movie. They can probably afford to spend that kind of money. But I mean, you can sit there with your finger and move up and down, and as you scroll up, it jumps over to different places and has this really nice thing. I mean, it's really quite amazing the kind of stuff that can happen nowadays on the web and the kind of stuff that we can do on the web. So yeah, I mean, the advancement from 10 years ago, even from just 10 years ago to now, is definitely quite a jump. So yeah, like I said, if nowadays, I think PWAs are a lot more viable as a solution, unless you really need those features that you're accessing from the phone. I really don't see a reason why PWA couldn't be a very good option for a lot of people, and couldn't be something that actually works really well. Now, I did want to go ahead and have this be a series, but as I began, as a lot of things happen where I say, oh, I'm going to do this. And then I go out and investigate, and I realize, oh my gosh, I mean, a PWA. If I was going to sit down and actually, because I wanted to put some code, I wanted to have the next couple of episodes of this to be code. And as I started digging into it and realizing all that was involved, I was like, wow, that's an awful lot of stuff. I mean, we're talking about showcasing how to write a service worker, how to implement offline databases. And like I said, I do know there are libraries out there to do that, but still, that takes a lot more research than the couple of hours I get a week. Now, what I am planning on doing, and this is something I've been talking about, and it is a plan to do, but I am planning on doing some master class, some master series. That's what I'm calling it, a master series. Basically, trying to teach from zero to mastery of a subject. It's going to start with the simplest of topics, which will be HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Those are the three that I feel are very important if you ever want to do any work on the web. If you can master those three, you can learn any framework. You can learn just about anything you need to do on the web. The one thing that I probably wouldn't discuss in the HTML one, I would go through the tags, the different HTML5 tags, but the one tag I probably wouldn't talk too much about is the one I just mentioned here, and that's the canvas. Because canvas is, wow. I mean, it's amazing what can be done on that. I'm just saying. I would mention it. I would talk about what it's doing, but I would not go into depth. That right there by itself could be its own masterclass. I mean, you're talking about you could almost write video games using HTML canvas. I wouldn't necessarily do that. That's not a very smart thing to do because video games are so process intensive, and JavaScript is not really the kind of language that really should be there to take on that kind of thing. But the idea is the level at which you could do things, the kind of things you could do, and the kind of things I've seen done, and they work really well, is extremely impressive. So I honestly think we're just starting to crack the surface as to what we can do with web technologies. Here comes the next idea. Today I was out walking my dogs, and as I do every day, and walking my last one, the Kelpie, which he's really great because he's so well trained, and he just kind of walks right next to me. And so I can really start. I don't have to correct. I don't have to keep track of. I don't have to do that with him. And I start thinking and thinking and thinking, and I'm wondering, I've thrown out this idea of Magma JS and another JavaScript framework, and I'm going, there are so many JavaScript frameworks out there, but this guy's request for me to do this HTML canvas site, because basically what he wants me to do, I don't know if I should say it or not, because he's going to pay me, but basically he wants me to do some 3D stuff with HTML canvas. I'll just leave it at that. And I am going to start researching into it here very soon and give him a quote. And so my thought about that is maybe that's the direction Magma needs to go, because there's React, there's Angular, there's Vue, There's gosh, and there's a lot of offshoots. There's P-React, which I actually, by the way, I absolutely love P-React. Look, there we go. I got it. I got it. There's P-React, which I use their signals library inside of my own React projects. There's is it Solid.js? I think there's Solid.js, and then there's a couple more in there that I know I'm not gonna remember. But there is an absolute ton of JavaScript frameworks out there, and so the idea kind of came to me because I was making the jokes that oh, it's another JavaScript framework. I actually threw out some memes when I first came up with the idea because I thought it was just it was an easy one to poke fun at because there's so many of them out there. But the more I started thinking about it, and the more this guy's request came into play, I'm going, maybe it wouldn't be such a bad idea to have a framework around making these kind of apps. Because if you think about it, if you think about it, now I could be completely wrong, and once I start researching, I could realize I'm stupid and I didn't think through all of the uh, all the ins and outs of this, and that happens to me a lot. I get these really great ideas, and then I actually research them, and I go, "Ooh," and I realize I was way overthinking this. I thought it could do more than it could. But if you think about it, HTML Canvas basically could be used almost like a a phone framework of sorts. Basically, if you think about it, iOS uh, and Android and all of them, they basically are a full fledged OS that allow you to display anything, and they actually decide how their displays work. In the end, they actually draw those displays on there. So when you create an application in Swift and you put a text box in there, their OS is actually drawing all of that for you, actually drawing, the cursor there blinking is actually when you type is actually, typing those things on there for you. It's actually doing all of that work for you. And so the thought process kind of clicked in my head. Could, and it's just an idea. It's probably the first way I'll go down when I start researching this. Could we do that with a canvas? Could we use HTML Canvas to be sort of like its own OS of sorts, if you will? Obviously not an OS because it's based on web technologies and the browser sitting there behind it. But just an idea, just something I'm throwing out there, and I do this a lot. I think through things a lot, and like I said, a couple days from now, I might sit there and I might completely invalidate my thought, and I wouldn't say I would embarrass myself. I mean, that's what. Well, I hope that's what most people who love technology do. They sit there and they think of these ideas, and boom, they have these really big explosion ideas, and then they come up and they go, okay, maybe not so great. Maybe that wasn't the best idea. And, then eventually they go and they flush it down the toilet. I've done that. I've done that a ton of times. I've come to these really great ideas and then realized that either A, it's already been done, B, um, yeah, exactly, Bob. B, it's it's not really viable. It may be possible, but it's not really viable. And so, is this something that's even worth doing? But if I'm going to do it anyways, I might as well at least take a look down that path and see if that's maybe a possibility. Because one of the things I wanted to throw into Magma, and I know I've mentioned this before, is I wanted to throw in the potential of having something with blockchain in there. And I don't mean cryptocurrency. I don't get into cryptocurrencies. I don't invest in those things. But I do think the technology behind it has a lot of really positive potential applications that have not been really fully flushed out yet. I think everyone's focused on cryptocurrency, and no one is looking at the real security implications, the potential for how much security and how much really great things could come out of the blockchain space. So that's something I'd like to have in the framework. But once again, these are just ideas that I haven't even begun to flush out yet. So that's where that ends for me. Like I said, this will probably end up continuing on to be part of a master class because it's yeah, exactly. Well, actually, I've got to get Bob brought up a good point there. I actually have a project idea once I create Magma. So I've got a project idea to check out the viability of it. And honestly, I think that would be if it was in Canvas, that would be even more interesting. Uh, there's already something out there that does that. The idea, I'll go ahead and share it. It's not a big deal for me. The idea is creating a web IDE. Now, there is something out there. Someone pointed out to me that GitHub has something that is like that. Basically, what it is GitHub, of course, is owned by Microsoft, and Microsoft created um, Visual Studio Code. Basically, the thing on GitHub is Visual Studio Code on the web. That's what it is. If you look at it, it looks exactly like Visual Studio Code. I'm not a huge fan of Visual Studio Code. I use WebStorm and I use JetBrains, and I think JetBrains is significantly better. Yes, you have to pay for it, but I've had the conversations back and forth many times with people. There was a recent conversation started by, I don't know his last name. I have to just call him by his handle name, Andrew Red, UK, where my post back was, I use WebStorm ID, and even he admitted that it's one of the subscriptions that he gladly pays for, and it's one of the ones that I gladly pay for too. And I don't just use WebStorm; I use the whole package. I've got the whole uh, what is it? The whole all IDEs pack. That's what it's called, which comes with like 10 IDEs. Now, granted, I haven't used as many of them because I've been focused mostly on the web. But I do want to do some Python for a backend in one of my websites here soon, and then I'll get to use PyCharm. Um, you know, I have used Writer. So I've done that one. Writer is their C# IDE, in case you're wondering. I think it's better than Visual Studio, by the way. Not Visual Studio Code, Visual Studio. And so, yeah, that's where I'd like to go with this IDE is to have something that looks like that. I think that would be really great, and it would really be a good proving point for a web framework, for any framework you're creating, to create something at that level. Because if you think about it, coding is one of the most process intensive things that you can do. And if your thing can actually hold up to writing, an actual IDE on the web, wow. I mean, that would really be a good proof of concept for your framework. Now, this is years down the road, because I probably won't even start on Magma, on investigating into Magma, until probably either the very end of this year or early next year, because I'm trying to wrap up the framework right now. I think if I wouldn't have had to prep for this thing today, I would have had the last of the date time changes done and be ready, be done with that. And then I was going to move on to one more really big component and hope that I can get a couple people to do some of the small components, and maybe we can try to come up with the final release for the end of the year, because I'd like to have something that people could start using. I have had a couple people I've talked to about it, and they sounded interested, so I'd like to get something out there and actually get the community to start using this, and really start actually validating what's good, what's not, finding some bugs for us, kicking it back, having us do bug fixes quickly and get things out there. Eventually upgrade to React 19. I've got React 18.3.1, which is basically, it has a lot of stuff in there that will kind of help you prepare your code to get ready to upgrade to React 19. So we're working along that path, trying to get to that place. That right there, the upgrade to React 19 probably wouldn't happen until after the first of the year, after the official 1.0 release of the library. So just kind of a very quick update there. But that's pretty much it, guys. I appreciate everyone who's shown up. This is probably the first live stream I've done that's had more than like 2 or 3 live viewers. So I really appreciate everyone showing up, and I hope you had fun watching me go and chase my dogs and muting myself a couple times. But hopefully, as a process, as part of this, you learned something as well, and learned that there really is some pretty interesting stuff when it comes down to progressive web apps. And like I said, I think they're really a good viability in what can be done with the web. And it's definitely something that is worth further investigation. If it's something you were always something that was, if you're on the fence about whether or not to do that or not, that is really awesome. And I think they're definitely worth. Like I said, I've done one before, done a couple before, and they're really nice. And they escape all the problems with standard installs on phones, on phone apps, and all that kind of stuff. So that's it for me. I'm going to stop talking, because I'll just ramble on forever and waste everyone's time. So it was nice to see you guys all here. Hit me up some more in